This happened about 10 years ago, when I was 15 and my brother Jake was 17. We were driving cross-country with Mum and my aunt. We were hauling our whole lives to a new town, and the trip had turned into that kind of long, quiet misery, where even arguments feel tired. By the third night, we were all fried. When the GPS said, "Next exit," Mum pulled off into a strip of roadside businesses that looked frozen in the 80s. The kind of place where the neon sign flickers and the laundromat still charges quarters. We checked into a 2-story motel called the Mooncrest. Faded blue paint, a sagging exterior light, the kind of place where the carpet pattern looks like it was a war plan. Mum and my aunt took the downstairs room near the office. Jake and I got shoved to the far end of the second floor. Our door had that little laminated map taped to the back with arrows pointing to ice and vending, like a treasure map that led to stale snacks. After we dragged the bags in, Mum remembered she needed ice. She was beat and wanted to sleep. "You two okay to grab it?" she asked. I shrugged. Jake grabbed the plastic bucket and we headed out, the door closing behind us with that soft, distant click that sounds louder in a quiet building. The hallway was that motel hallway, yellowed lights, thin carpet, the hum of an ancient air conditioner. Midway down, a guy came out of a door a few rooms from ours. He looked like he had been pulled out of a decade that still believed in gelled hair and graphic tees. Late 30s maybe, hair slicked back, and he held his key like he wasn't sure what to do with it. He didn't say anything, didn't nod. He just watched, eyes flat. We passed him and went to the stairwell. The heavy metal door shut behind us and echoed. Then the latch clicked again. I looked through the little mesh window. He'd followed. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, easy, patient, not running, just moving when we moved. A slow kind of following that felt worse than any sprint. "You seeing this?" I whispered. Jake nodded, not wanting to make a scene. We tried to act normal as we walked to the ice machine, which the map swore was at the other end of the building. The farther we went, the louder I could hear those steady steps behind us. Not fast, not prowling, just deliberate. The ice machine is loud in every motel story, right? This one sounded like a freezer trying to start a plane. We stuffed the bucket under the flume, and the metal clatter of ice filled the alcove. For those 10 seconds, the noise was a kind of blessed cover. When it stopped, the motel snapped back into silence. Jake turned with the bucket, and his face went white. The man was standing down the hall, maybe 30 feet away, just watching. When our eyes met, he started walking toward us. Not a run, but a confident, increasing pace. We bolted for the nearest stairwell, the bucket sloshing ice around like a tiny storm. We dashed up 2 flights and back down the corridor to our room, fumbling cards and keys until the lock registered with that blessed, beeping click. We slammed every latch we could find and leaned against the door, breath fogging in the stale air. We told Mum. She tried to reassure us. Probably just lost, honey. But her voice shook. We were too wired to sleep. At about 1 in the morning, there was a sound that still sits in my teeth when I think about it. A heavy pounding, full force against our door. Not a knock, a battering, like someone testing wood with their shoulder. My heart stopped. Mum grabbed the phone, tried the front desk. Nothing. She whispered 911 and into the receiver said, "There's someone at our door." The pounding stopped as fast as it had started, leaving a ringing silence that felt worse than noise. Minutes later, someone knocked, slow and official. "Police! Is anyone in there okay?" came from the hallway. Mom peered through the peephole. 2 officers stood there in the dim light. They were calm, professional. One sat with us while the other checked the hall and the stairwells. They came back, shaking their heads. We checked. No one out there. We'll pull footage. We tried to breathe. Then the officer came back, holding a tablet, face hard. You weren't imagining it. We've got you on camera. On the footage, the guy followed us from the second floor down to the ice machine, watched as we left, then circled back, stayed near the stairwell, and eventually came right to our door. He stood there a long time, just stood, then started banging. After that, he moved down the corridor, took the emergency stairs, and vanished near the parking lot where the cameras didn't reach. They ran his face through the system and said they'd circulate it. Someone promised to have patrols swing by all night. They stayed a while, took statements, seemed to take it seriously. But when they left, and the fluorescent glow from the hallway faded, the motel felt the same. Thin walls, distant cars, and our small locked room like a fragile shell. We left before dawn. We stuffed everything in the car under a sky that was still wrong with sleep and drove off without breakfast. The road felt like leaving a storm behind. We never heard anything more. We never got a call from the police. We never saw any paperwork. We only had the one photograph of a man on a camera screen, a stranger looking blank and patient, and the memory of someone who knew which room we were in and how to make you feel watched. Years later, I still wake up sometimes at the tiniest sound and look at the door. Maybe that's the point of motel stories. Not that something dramatic had to happen, but that someone could stand in a hallway and choose to be there. The scariest part wasn't the pounding. It wasn't the camera footage. It was knowing how close it felt, how normal it all looked, until it wasn't. We were supposed to be a family on a boring move, but that night the motel taught us how quickly safe can become nope. And our small locked room like a fragile shell. We left before dawn. We stuffed everything in the car under a sky that was still wrong with sleep and drove off without breakfast. The road felt like leaving a storm behind. We never heard anything more. We never got a call from the police. We never saw any paperwork. We only had the one photograph of a man on a camera screen. This happened years ago when I was on a solo drive across the country to a family reunion. I'd been doing the usual, miles of highway, bad coffee, podcast episodes I'd fall asleep halfway through. A storm rolled in that afternoon, slow and ugly, the kind that sits on the land and refuses to move. Rain hammered the windshield, the wipers making a frantic, useless rhythm. Visibility dropped to nothing. Traffic slowed, then stopped, and for the next few hours the highway became a river of brake lights and fogged windows. Then the wreck happened a few cars ahead of me. I never saw the moment. Just an aftermath of flashing lights and spray and people standing on the shoulder like models frozen in mid-movement. An ambulance took off with a siren still tearing the night. The whole thing sat in my head like a stone. By the time I finally crawled out of that jam, I was 5 hours behind schedule, bone-tired, and something in me had gone quiet and flat. I needed sleep more than I needed anything else. I pulled off at the next exit I saw and found a little strip of businesses clinging to the highway. A diner whose neon "open" flickered like it might burn out at any second. A boarded-up hardware store and a motel set back from the road. The place called itself something rustic. Ridgewood Lodge or Pinecrest. The name didn't matter. It was a single-story row of rooms, a sagging roof, dead trees casting thin, scratchy shadows. The parking lot was cracked. Not a single other car was there. The office had that tiny sliding window, like the kind you see at late-night check-ins when the clerk doesn't want to leave the back room. Behind the glass was a man in a stained t-shirt who looked like he was running on fumes. His eyes were ringed with shadow. He didn't smile when I approached. He didn't ask my name at first. He just looked from my car to me and back, and his stare felt like an assessment. "You alone?" he asked before I'd said hello. No small talk, no "how was your drive?" Just the question, blunt and oddly precise. "Yeah," I said, "just passing through. I'll only be a few hours." He didn't ask for ID, didn't want a card. He pointed to a little sign that said, "Cash only," and didn't bother to hide the way his fingers twitched like he expected me to hesitate. I dug through my bag, the inside of it full of crumpled receipts and a tangled phone charger, and found a few bills. He slid a key under the glass without a word. Room 6. The room smelled like stale perfume and something chemical trying too hard to be clean. The carpet was that institutional brown, threadbare in the high spots. The lamp flickered when I turned it on, and a TV from another century sat bolted to the dresser. I took the one travel bag and took a quick inventory of what I needed: shower, change of clothes, sleep, and then, on a stupid hunch that's now burned into me, I flipped the mattress. There they were. Dark, rust-colored stains tucked into the seams like a secret map, and then the quick, awful shuffle of a cockroach sprinting from under the box, spring into the shadow. I'd seen enough roadside motel horror to know when to bail. The bed was contaminated in a way I couldn't ignore. I could have tried to find another room. I could have gone back to the clerk and demanded a refund. But I was tired in a way that makes you make poor decisions and compromises. I folded the travel bag back and decided the trunk would be better than that bed. I moved everything into the SUV, folded down the back seats, made a lumpy nest with my suitcase for a pillow, and curled up in the back hatch. It felt ridiculous and primitive, and somehow safer than the stale carpet and the mattress that had secrets. I slept. If it was an hour, it was generous. What pulled me out of sleep was the sound of a voice and the gravel crunching outside. That impatient, casual crunch that means someone is walking the lot. I peered out the tint of the hatch glass and saw the clerk on his phone, standing under the sodium light like something out of a cheap crime novel. Thin, gaunt, the same stained t-shirt. I couldn't make out his words at first, just the rhythm of a conversation. Then I heard him say, "Still there, room 6, like he was checking on something small and important. He hung up and stood for a second, looking around like he was waiting for someone else. He walked over to room 6 and unlocked the door. I felt that instinctive animal tightening in my chest. He stepped inside without turning on the light. He was in there no more than a minute, then slammed the door so hard the glass on the window smoked in my ears. When he came back out, he wasn't alone. Another man, broader, darker, someone I hadn't seen arrive, waited near the far edge of the lot. They argued in low, sharp bursts I couldn't quite catch. Then the clerk walked toward my SUV. I froze. There was no dramatic music, no ominous soundtrack, only the slam of my breath and the blood in my ears. I dug down into the mess in the hatch and pulled a t-shirt over my head to make myself look like part of the discard pile. Clothes, a pillow, a sleeping bag. It's ridiculous, but it felt like camouflage. If anyone peered through the tint, they'd see a jumble. Not a person. The clerk's hand went to my driver's side window and tested the handle. Locked. He peered in, face too close to the glass. For a terrible second, I watched him readjust the angle of his head, testing whether he could see anything. He didn't. Maybe the tint did its job. Maybe it was just dark. Maybe my outline blended in. Whatever it was, he walked on. Both men drifted toward the diner across the way and gestured hard at something I couldn't see. I didn't wait to find out what they were planning. I climbed into the front seat as quietly as I could, slid the key into the ignition, and the engine broke the night like a gunshot. The two men spun toward the sound. For a second, one of them looked straight at me, eyes narrowing, and I felt a cold slide down my spine. Then I drove. I didn't stop for another motel. I drove until the sky paled and the highway turned from black asphalt to a softer, washed gray. When the adrenaline finally uncoiled, I called a few friends. One said I should have called the cops. Another offered to pick up a hotel room and put me on the bill. I didn't take any of it. I was shaking too hard to think of paperwork or justice. I just wanted to put as many miles between me and that lot as possible. 3 weeks later, I opened Google Maps like it was a case file. I found the motel, same layout, same name, and this time the label said, "Permanently closed." I called the county police nonchalantly, more to tick it off my to-do list than from any expectation. The officer I spoke with told me the motel had shut down a few days after my trip. No public explanation, no news report. "Sometimes businesses close for health code violations," she said, which felt like a polite way of saying they didn't want to get into it. When I told the story to friends, they told me I'd probably misread things. "Maybe he was just checking the room," they said. Maybe the other guy was a friend. One person even suggested I'd imagined the cockroach in that half-asleep state. But the image of the clerk stepping into room 6 without turning on the light, that deliberate, small thing, stayed with me. And the way he came back out, closing the door like someone who'd expected a different interior, like a property owner who finds his place empty when he thought it ought to be occupied. That anger in his posture when the room was empty, that wasn't something exhaustion should manufacture. Maybe there was a mundane explanation. Maybe they were evicting a squatter. Maybe it was a drugs thing or a domestic mess. I'll never know. What I do know is how it felt. Small, exposed and stupid for trusting a man with hollow eyes and a mood for cash-only exchanges. Sometimes, months later, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and my hands would be clenched like I'd forgotten to lock a door. Not because I thought they were still out there. Though, to be honest, sometimes that fear peeks through. But because it taught me something private and ugly about looking like an easy mark on a bad night. If there's a moral here, it's not just, don't sleep in a motel with bedbugs. It's that exhaustion makes you negotiate with small dangers you'd normally avoid. It's that a man can step into a lightless room and carry whatever's inside back into the world, and you never know what he was looking for, or whether you were what he wanted in the first place. I told my story because the memory behaves like a loose tooth. It aches until you tap it a few times with your tongue and hear the sound. It's dull now, but it's there. And every time I pass a strip of closed roadside businesses on a late drive, I check my mirrors a little longer. I'll never forget the night it happened. This was back in 2018, during a cold November, when a string of disappearances had been making the local news in Ohio. One man, a trucker, had gone missing along the interstate, and his photo had been on every gas station bulletin board and newspaper cover. People had stopped paying attention, the way you stop noticing an old sign after driving past it too many times. Some assumed he'd just left town. Others whispered darker possibilities. Foul play, someone watching, someone waiting. I was driving late that night, returning from a delivery job. My route took me past a small, forgotten motel, that looked like it had been abandoned, but wasn't. The sign buzzed weakly, the neon flickering, and the parking lot was cracked and littered with leaves. Every time I passed it during the day, I felt a pit in my stomach. But that night, tired and cold, I thought I'd just check in for a few hours and rest. I pulled into the lot around 11:30 p.m. The office was dark, except for a faint glow behind the small glass window. An older man with deep lines etched into his face sat behind it, motionless, staring at me. He didn't greet me. He just watched as I parked, then asked, "You alone?" His voice was flat, almost bored, but it carried an edge that made my chest tighten. I nodded, handing him cash, and he slid a key under the window. Room 12. The room itself was worse than I expected. The carpet was matted and damp, and the smell of mildew hit me as soon as I opened the door. The bed sagged in the middle, the sheets yellowed and stiff. A single lamp flickered on the nightstand, throwing long, jittering shadows across the walls. I set my things down and went to the bathroom, hoping to shake off the unease. Then, on a whim I immediately regretted, I checked under the bed. Something scuttled away, too quick to see properly. My stomach churned. I climbed back onto the bed, pulling the covers tight around me, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Sleep didn't come. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a faint knock at the door, then another, then a series of knocks, deliberate, slow, like someone testing the locks. I froze. My hands went to my phone, but there was no signal. I listened, heart hammering. The knocks stopped. I held my breath, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Then I heard a voice, low and raspy, calling my name from the hallway. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The doorknob rattled. My pulse was deafening in my ears. Whoever it was, they knew I was alone. I heard footsteps retreat, fading down the hall, then silence. I stayed on the bed until first light, too afraid to even glance at the window. When I finally left, I didn't stop to pay. The parking lot was empty, the office dark, as if no one had ever been there. Weeks later, I learned from a local news tip that the motel had been linked to multiple disappearances over the years. Some guests simply never checked out. Some were found days later in nearby woods, others never at all. I drive past that stretch of highway sometimes, and the sign still flickers, the lot still cracked, the curtains drawn tight. I slow down every time. The memory of that night, the knocks, the voice, the eyes behind the office glass, never leaves me. Horror doesn't always hide in abandoned buildings or deep forests. Sometimes it's right off the highway, behind a flickering neon sign, in a room you thought you could rest in, and it only takes one sound to make you wish you'd never stopped.